Every man knows that feeling. You're standing there trying to explain yourself, calmly, logically, maybe even respectfully. You're not yelling. You're not being cruel. You're just trying to make sense of what happened. You're trying to be understood. But the longer it goes, the worse it gets. Her voice rises. Her words get sharper. She starts bringing up things that don't even feel connected to what you were talking about. And suddenly you're defending yourself against 10 different things at once. You start thinking, what is happening right now? I'm just trying to talk. That's the moment most men realize this isn't about logic anymore. It's about emotion. And you can't win emotion with reason. See, when a man argues, he's usually trying to bring things back to order. He wants to sort it out, to put things where they belong. He believes if he can explain clearly enough, she'll understand, and the tension will go away. But that's not how it works, because what she's reacting to isn't your point. It's how she feels in the moment. When you start trying to win, when you start stacking facts and examples to prove you're right, she doesn't see it as you clarifying things. She sees it as you disconnecting from her. You're stepping out of the emotional space and into the intellectual one, and to her, that feels cold. That's why men walk away from these moments feeling crazy. You tried to stay calm, she got louder. You tried to make sense, she said. You don't care. It feels unfair. It feels impossible. But underneath all that, what's really happening is a clash between how men and women handle conflict. Men want to fix, women want to feel. So when you come into an argument thinking, if I just explain it right, she'll calm down, you're already losing the fight. Not because you're wrong, but because you're speaking a different language. It's not that she doesn't care about your logic. It's that in that moment, logic doesn't make her feel safe. And until she feels safe, nothing you say will land. That's the truth most men learn the hard way. You can't argue your way into peace. You can only understand your way into it. Most men walk into an argument thinking they're about to have a discussion. You think, okay, let's talk about what happened. Let's figure this out. You're focused on the topic, the thing that started it. The plan you changed, the message you forgot to send, the tone she didn't like. But what she feels is something else. She doesn't feel like you're discussing a situation. She feels like you're pulling away. You're talking about what happened. She's reacting to what she feels it means. When you say, that's not what I said, she hears, you don't care how I feel. When you say, you're overreacting, she hears, you're too much for me. Every time you try to bring it back to logic, it sounds to her like you're minimizing her emotions. And that's the trap. Because from your side, you're just trying to calm things down. You're trying to fix it. But from her side, it feels like you're emotionally checking out. That's why she pushes harder. Not because she loves conflict, but because she's trying to reach you through it. The louder she gets, the more she's saying, I need to know you still care. I need to know you're here with me. Meanwhile, you're sitting there wondering why this is turning into a mess. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't insult her. You just tried to explain your side. But what you don't see is that your calmness, the thing you think is helping, often feels like distance to her. That's why so many men get labeled as emotionally unavailable. It's not that they don't feel anything, it's that they process conflict through reason instead of emotion. And in relationships, that can come off as indifference. It's a hard truth, but here's the reality. In moments of conflict, she's not looking for logic. She's looking for connection. She doesn't want a debate partner. She wants to know she still matters to you, even when things are tense. That's why arguing feels like it never works, because while you're trying to fix the situation, she's trying to fix the feeling. And until both of you understand that difference, every argument will feel like two people talking in different rooms. Loud voices. No real connection. Here's what nobody really explains to men. You and her aren't actually fighting about the same thing. You're fighting in two different languages. Men argue in the language of logic. You rely on facts, memory, and reason. You think, if we can just look at what happened, we'll figure out who's right, who's wrong, and move on. But women often argue in the language of emotion. She's not asking for a list of events. She's expressing how those events made her feel. When she says, you never listen to me, she doesn't literally mean never. What she means is, lately I don't feel heard. You're hearing words. She's expressing feelings. And that's where everything starts to fall apart. Because when you respond to her emotional statement with logic, it feels like a rejection. She says, you don't care about me, and you reply, that's not true, I took you out last week. To her, that sounds like proof that you're not even hearing the part that matters. And now she's not just upset, she's hurt. Because instead of understanding what she meant, you corrected what she said. It's not that one side is right or wrong, it's that men and women are wired differently in how they connect. Men connect through clarity. Let's fix this. Women connect through emotion. Let's feel this. So when she gets emotional and you stay logical, you both end up frustrated. She feels unheard and you feel misunderstood. You both want peace, but you're walking in opposite directions trying to get there. The emotional language barrier is real, and most couples never learn how to translate it. It's why small issues turn into explosions. It's why she says, "It's not what you said, it's how you said it." And it's why you walk away thinking, there's no winning here. But the truth isn't that there's no winning, it's that winning isn't the goal. The goal is understanding. The moment you stop trying to prove your point and start listening for the feeling underneath her words, you realize she's not attacking you. She's trying to reach you. That's the shift. When you stop hearing everything as criticism and start hearing it as communication, not perfect communication, but emotional communication, things begin to make sense. Because once you learn her language, you stop needing to argue at all. There's a point in every argument where something shifts. You can feel it. You're still talking, but she's no longer really listening. Her eyes glaze over, or maybe they narrow. She's not hearing your words anymore. She's reacting to what those words mean to her. You might be saying something simple like, "That's not what I meant," but in her mind it sounds like, "You don't care how I made you feel." That's the silent translation happening in real time. Your logic turns into rejection through her emotional filter. Once emotions take over, perception changes. Your tone, your expression, your body language, all of it starts saying more than your words. If you look tired or frustrated, she sees dismissal. If you take a breath before responding, she hears impatience. Even your silence can feel like abandonment. And to be fair, it's not because she wants to misunderstand you, it's because she's in emotional survival mode. When people feel hurt or unsafe emotionally, they stop analyzing and start defending. She's no longer trying to understand you, she's trying to protect herself. That's why it's so hard to make progress in that moment. You can't reason with someone whose emotions are flooding the conversation. You might as well be trying to pour water into a cup that's already overflowing. Nothing's getting in. And this is where most men lose it. You start to feel powerless. You think, what's the point of even talking if she's not listening? So you either shut down or walk away. And that's the part she'll remember. Not your explanation, not your effort to stay calm, but the moment you stopped engaging. From her side, it looks like you gave up. From your side, it feels like you were pushed out. Both of you are right, and both of you are wrong. Because what's missing isn't truth, it's safety. When she no longer feels safe to express herself, she starts fighting to be heard. When you no longer feel safe to explain yourself, you start withdrawing to protect your peace. And that's the loop. The more she fights, the more you pull back. The more you pull back, the louder she gets. What's sad is, both of you are trying to reach each other, just in completely opposite ways. That's why arguments don't get resolved through talking louder or explaining better. They get resolved through emotional awareness, through recognizing when she's stopped hearing you and realizing that what she needs in that moment isn't more information. It's more connection. One of the hardest things for a man to admit is how deeply he wants to be understood. We don't talk about that much, but it's real. Every man who's ever been in a heated argument with a woman knows that feeling. The frustration that builds when you're trying to explain yourself and it feels like nothing's getting through. You're not trying to win, you just don't want to be painted as something you're not. You don't want to be the villain in a story that doesn't match what's in your heart. So you start explaining. You try to go step by step, showing that you weren't trying to hurt her, that you meant well, that she's misunderstanding you. You start defending yourself because deep down, you just want to be seen for your intentions, not just your mistakes. But here's the problem. The more you try to explain, the worse it gets. Because while you're fighting to be understood logically, she's reacting emotionally. And those two things don't meet in the middle. You say, "That's not fair." She hears, "You're wrong." You say, "You're twisting my words." She hears, "I don't care about your feelings." You say, "I didn't mean it like that." She hears, "Your emotions don't make sense." And suddenly what started as an attempt to clear things up becomes another reason for her to feel dismissed. That's what makes this so painful for men. You're trying to bring peace, but she keeps reacting like you're bringing war. And inside, it makes you feel helpless. You start thinking, what am I supposed to do? If I talk, it's wrong. If I stay quiet, it's worse. That's usually the point where men emotionally shut down. Not because they don't care, but because they feel like caring doesn't help. But here's what most men never learn. Being understood starts with understanding yourself first. You can't expect her to hear you clearly if you're speaking from a place of defense. When you feel misunderstood, your instinct is to explain. But what she needs in that moment isn't an explanation. It's reassurance. She needs to feel safe before she can listen. It sounds unfair, but it's the reality of emotional connection. She can't hear you until she feels you. So when you're in that moment, when you're desperate to be seen for who you really are, the answer isn't more words, it's calm presence. It's showing through your tone, your body language, your patience, that you care more about connection than about being right. That's the moment she starts to soften. Not because you convinced her, but because you stopped fighting her and started standing with her. Every man wants to be understood, but the truth is, you earn understanding when you make her feel safe enough to listen. When a woman gets angry, most men see it as an attack. The tone, the words, the emotion, it all feels like she's aiming at you, and your natural reaction is to defend yourself. You try to explain, to push back, to keep your balance in the storm. But what most men never realize is that underneath that anger, there's almost always something softer. Fear. It might be fear that she's not valued anymore, fear that you're drifting away, fear that she's losing her place in your life, or that you no longer see her the same way. Anger is just the armor she puts on to protect that fear, because it's easier to be mad than it is to say, I'm scared you don't love me like you used to. And that's the part most arguments never touch. You see her anger and think she's overreacting. But what's really happening is she's trying to protect her heart in the only way she knows how. Think about how many times this has played out. She accuses you of not caring or of changing. You tell her she's imagining things, that everything's fine. But the more you say that, the more upset she gets. Why? Because she's not looking for reassurance in words. She's looking for emotional proof. When you stay calm but distant, she doesn't feel safe. When you match her anger, she feels attacked. When you try to fix it too quickly, she feels dismissed. The only thing that reaches her is presence. That steady, grounded energy that says, I see you. I'm not leaving. We'll figure this out. That doesn't mean you have to absorb her anger or tolerate disrespect, but it does mean you have to understand what's underneath it. That most of the time, it's not about winning a fight. It's about trying not to lose connection. When she's angry, what she's really saying is, I'm hurt, and I don't know how to tell you without losing you. And when you start to see that, you stop taking everything so personally. You stop hearing her tone and start hearing her pain. That's emotional maturity, learning to look past the reaction and see the wound behind it. And when you can do that, everything changes. The fight becomes a chance to reconnect instead of a reason to pull away. Because once you see the fear behind her anger, you realize she's not your enemy. She's just scared of losing you. Every man has fallen into this one. She's upset, saying things that don't sound fair. She's twisting your words, bringing up the past, maybe even throwing accusations that sting. And your instinct, your whole body, wants to defend itself. You want to say, that's not what happened. You want to explain, to correct her version of the story. You want to protect your integrity because being misunderstood feels unbearable. But here's what usually happens. The moment you defend yourself, she feels dismissed. It doesn't matter how calm or reasonable you think you're being, she hears your defense as disconnection. You're saying, that's not true, but what she hears is, your feelings don't matter. And that's the trap. The harder you try to clear your name, the more she feels unseen. The more she feels unseen, the harder she pushes. And before you know it, you're both fighting for the same thing, to be understood, but in completely opposite ways. You defend because you want her to understand you. She attacks because she wants you to understand her. Nobody's actually wrong, you're just both protecting something fragile, your sense of being heard. But defensiveness kills connection faster than anything, because no matter how right you are, the moment you start defending, the energy shifts from connection to competition. You're no longer on the same side trying to solve a problem. You're two people trying to prove who's more right about it. And here's the thing. In relationships, being right rarely matters. What matters is whether either of you still feels safe to open up. Defensiveness makes that impossible. It tells her, I care more about protecting my image than understanding your pain. And even if that's not your intention, that's how it feels. So the next time you feel that instinct rise, that urge to correct, explain, or justify, take a breath. Ask yourself, what am I trying to protect right now? My pride or this connection? Sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is stay still, not silent in anger, not cold in withdrawal, just calm, grounded and open. Because when you stop defending and start listening, she stops fighting. When she feels you're not her opponent, she doesn't need to attack anymore. That's how you turn an argument into understanding. Not by proving your point, but by showing her you care more about peace than about being right. There's something a lot of men never get taught, some us that your presence carries more weight than your words. When she's emotional, she's not listening to logic. She's reading your energy. She's watching how you breathe, how you look at her, how grounded you are. And if you can stay steady while she's spinning, that does more to calm her than any argument ever could. Emotional presence means being there without trying to fix or control the moment. It's not silence that punishes. It's silence that holds space. It's standing in front of her storm and saying, without words, I'm here. I'm not running. You don't have to fight me. Most men never learn that kind of strength. We're taught that control means keeping things together, keeping emotions out of it. But emotional presence is the opposite of control. It's surrendering to the fact that you can't control her feelings, and you don't need to. When you can do that, when you can stay calm without shutting down, everything changes. She starts to feel safe again. Her tone softens. Her anger starts to dissolve. Because the truth is, she was never trying to win an argument. She was testing if you were still emotionally there with her. And this doesn't mean you have to tolerate disrespect or chaos. Presence isn't weakness. It's not about letting someone walk all over you. It's about being centered enough that you don't get dragged into the emotional fire. You're not reacting, you're anchoring. You can look her in the eyes, stay calm, and still say, I get that you're upset, but I'm not your enemy. That kind of groundedness speaks louder than any defense ever could. It's strange how rare that kind of presence is. Not because men can't do it, but because most men were never shown what it looks like. We learn to fix problems, not to feel them. We learn to respond with logic, not patience. But once you understand how powerful calm energy is, you start to see how much strength there is in simply staying. Because when you stop trying to win, or to prove, or to explain, and you just stand there, connected and unshaken, she finally feels it. She feels safe again. And once a woman feels safe, everything else becomes easier. That's what real masculinity looks like. Not dominance, not silence, but presence. It's the quiet confidence of a man who doesn't need to fight for control because he already has control of himself. At some point, every man who's been through enough arguments realizes something. The more you try to control the situation, the less peace you have. You try to control the tone, the timing, the logic. You tell yourself if you just say it the right way, she'll finally understand. But the harder you try to manage it, the more it slips away. Because arguments aren't about control, they're about connection. And the moment you start treating her like a problem to solve instead of a person to understand, you lose that connection completely. That's the shift most men have to go through, moving from how do I stop this from blowing up to how do I stay connected even when it does. Control says, I need to win. Connection says, I want to understand. Control is about ego, making sure you're not the one to blame, not the one who looks weak. Connection is about empathy, being willing to see her side even when it hurts your pride. The truth is, trying to control a relationship is just a way to avoid vulnerability. Because if you're in control, you don't have to feel uncertain. You don't have to sit in discomfort. But connection requires exactly that, being open, being uncomfortable, being human. And that's what most men avoid. Not because they don't care, but because vulnerability feels unsafe. We're taught that emotions are messy, that calmness equals strength, that we should never lose control. But real control is inner. It's being steady enough to let go of the outer. When you stop trying to steer every argument, something changes. You start listening differently. You stop reacting to every jab or emotional wave. You realize you can let her have her moment without needing to fix it. And strangely, that's when she starts calming down. Because what she was looking for all along wasn't your control. It was your presence. That's the irony of it. When you stop controlling, you actually gain more peace. When you stop arguing, you actually get heard. When you stop trying to win, you actually reconnect. Because connection doesn't come from being right. It comes from being real. It comes from saying, I don't agree with everything you're saying, but I get how you feel. That's what makes her feel seen. That's what softens her. That's what builds trust again. And once you make that shift from control to connection, you stop fearing conflict. You stop seeing it as a threat, and you start seeing it as a chance to understand each other more deeply. Because the goal was never to avoid arguments. The goal is to grow through them together.